Students, I was interrupted by some technical problem, and there was thunder and lightning outside, and it is reminiscent of Shakespearean drama, So might be the reason, and the mobile all of a sudden stopped working. So I just want to continue and sum up the point in this session. And see, we were discussing about is another poem. Yeah, at this level, PG level, it is a must to delve deep in various dimensions regarding the poem, the poet lover, and bird watcher. And the poet, remember, see, now it must be in your tips, three companions: P, philosophy, poetry, and party. So two stages are there. And when the poet, see, this poem is also very important when you study his poem, which is prescribed in your syllabus, poet lover and bird watcher. Why? Because two stages are there. I just focus on these two stages only according to your level and time constraint. See, at the first phase, or rather stage, the poet, he tends to make comparison between the two, philosophy and poetry. And see, in the poem, now why it is necessary to understand it, because the poet points out the ideas like say moral proved and the spirit moved, these is, and especially when myth of light, he talks about some remote areas and the human consciousness, and see the level of mind, conscious mind and subconscious mind, when you store several ideas, and then they generally express in conscious mind. So subconscious mind is also very important. So we have different dimensions: psychological aspect and philosophical. When he it's a coincidence when we were discussing, see, it is an expedition, this a poetry composition, expedition from darkness to illumination. And a nice coincidence, yesterday, all of a sudden, it was, must be some other reason when we were discussing it, that electricity, it was curtailed and it was totally dark, though it is at materialistic level, superficial level. Even then, practical knowledge of that, that when at that time it was raining heavily, and even mobile, stopped working. So this is night, we can say, nice example to make you understand. But at this materialistic level, here, deeper level, when life, even when poetry composition, it is an exploration, and it is a journey, an expedition from say darkness to illumination, enlightenment. This is what the poet wants to highlight here. And he talks about myth of light also. So it is a must to understand this idea. Yes, not only flesh, very important idea when he talks about human consciousness, the poetry, different level, that it is not confined to flesh, some physical and materialistic levels. What is important? Myth of light, some mystical experience also, spiritual enhancement, and obviously philosophical dimensions. So two stages I would like to sum up with this point, because it is just a continuation, that in the first stage he makes comparison, that he tends to say establish superiority of poetry over philosophy. And now the second stage is more important, second phase, because there should be no comparison at all. And philosophy and poetry, they are integrated to each other, complementary to each other. In various poems, see, Indian poets, be Indian poets, or say American, British, Australian, or all over the world. See, if you study deeply any poem, or any, in the sense, most of the poems, there is some or other philosophical idea in that. And because philosophy is also integrated with your life, it maybe studying the meaning of life, the justification of life, what is the reason of your existence. And here in myth of life, the poet wants to engulf all these ideas, all these dimensions and perception. Therefore, here the philosophy, and it is the reason that I want you to uh, highlight, I want you to cover this point as well. That mundane language, and the poet, when he talks about poetry in this poem, and even in this poem, what are important aspects? In three phrases, he has expressed language of senses, and he also points out the virtue of common when we are talking about the people in general, humanity. As you know, earlier you remember Nissim Ezekiel's view that poetry, it is an expression of, yes, human mind. It is also an expression of human sensitivity and sensibility. Therefore, humanity, product of humanity. And in virtue of commonness, he points out in this poem. And yes, third important, and earlier, as when he talks about, say, some kind of special bent of mind for scientific advancement. But all these are complementary to each other. And at the same time, it is inner sanctuary of a human being, and which, this inner sanctuary undertakes journey of upliftment. And therefore all these now, always, when we have, technique of parallelism, so you must also have knowledge of this, that philosophy in which is integrated to poetry, the composition of poetry, writing poetry, and yeah, bird watching. All these three, always you constantly think of that also in these three various tasks when the poet talks about. And see in the concluding line, and in which, the poet points out that we would, discuss in much detail, but at least when I sum up the point, writing poetry is divine inspiration, and divine inspiration due to human consciousness, human psyche, as we discussed earlier. So this divine inspiration leads to composition of poem. And the notion of slow movement is very important. And what does it imply? Slow movement, yes, positive result. It is, all these three acts. Remember, three acts of, yes, lover, bird watcher, and poet. So this it is a sort of reward when you are really diligent, hardworking, and you have patience, you have these virtues. So you would lead to success. We'll continue. Thank you.